with common sense for the Commonwealth. It's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646.
The legislation includes the requirement that Arkansas provide voter IDs free of charge to people who don't have identification otherwise. The voter ID requirement won't take effect until there's funding for the IDs or January 1st, 2014, whichever is later.
What that disconnect between the rhetoric and action means, I'll leave to the analysts to judge. We simply evaluate it and take necessary precautionary measures.
We've made clear that there is a chance for diplomacy if they do the right thing, but not if they don't.
We think it's time for them to switch lanes. We seek peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and we think that's in the best interest of everyone in the region.
Right after the shootings in Newtown, the NRA's Wayne LaPierre called for armed guards in the nation's schools. Today, the gun lobby details the recommendations of what it's calling the National School Shield Program.
Many components significantly scaled back equipment purchases and supply purchases, curtailed staff travel, reduced the use of air cards. Within the Executive Office of the President, several offices have sent furlough notices to their staff, including to 480 employees of the Office of Management and Budget.
I just try to react to something that I can hit. You know, Nolasco's a great pitcher. You know, he carved us up all year last year, and you know, he carved me last year. So, you know, being able to get 2 knocks off of him was, you know, good for me. And I think, you know, we saw him pretty well today. And you know, I don't know if you're going to do that every time against him.
Before we get started, let me say NBC and I have reached a peaceful, amicable agreement that is both beneficial to both sides. April Fool! That's so silly, ridiculous. Never happened.
Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks. It is Tuesday, April the 2nd. John is on his spring break, but Steve Ray here in the D.C. studios, along with political editor for BearingDrift.com, Sean Kenny, is with us this morning, and we are very pleased to welcome a member of the House Financial Services Committee, also doing a tremendous job in representing the 5th District here in the Commonwealth. We're welcoming Congressman Robert Hurt this morning. Good morning, Congressman. How are you, sir?
Good morning. Thanks for having me on your program.
Absolutely. And Sean, you can take it from here, but I happen to know that the congressman has been teaching middle schoolers the difference between tax and spend and how it should be done.
Is that right?
Well, we've had a good week here the last week, spending time around the district, getting to see folks. And one of our recent visits has been with the Chatham Middle School, right here in Chatham Middle School, and the Future Farmers of America, and we had a long discussion about spending. And I tell you, what's remarkable, maybe it's not too surprising, but these young people understand that you can't spend more than what you've got, mm-hmm. and unfortunately, there are a lot of folks in Washington who do not understand that, and it was very gratifying to be with this group of young people who just couldn't imagine why anybody would adopt a policy or support anything that would require you to spend more than what you've got. And I was very impressed.
Yeah. Well, out of any curiosity, was the middle school classroom able to produce a budget faster than the U.S. Senate? Or
Absolutely. They have a much better track record on that over the last 3 years than I guess the U.S. Senate does. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing well. And actually, Steve, Robert Hurt is my congressman in the 5th District. So
congratulations to you. I'm jealous.
And not only is he my congressman, he's also the most conservative member of the Virginia delegation. So I am very, very proud to be represented by Robert Hurt in Virginia.
That accounts for the big smile on your face.
Real quick, I mean, I don't know if you even asked this question of these young kids, but you know, there's a lot of talk in Washington in terms of, is it revenue enhancement? enhancement, which is typically a code word for tax increases, or whether or not you close loopholes, or whether or not you cut spending, or whatever the case may be. It's their future that we're spending today in Washington. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, what are they telling you as to what the fix ought to be?
Well, I don't know that they think too critically about it, but what they do understand is that I think that they understand, and these are young people who are involved in a program called Future Farmers of America, FFA, and all rural districts, school districts have this program. It's a wonderful program, and what it teaches young people is the most basic thing, that the clothes that we wear and the food that we eat comes from somewhere. It doesn't just come by itself. It comes because of hard work. It comes because people go out and work with the animals, work in the fields, cultivate, and then at the end of the day, after all that hard work, a season of hard work, you have something to show for it, and it's something that it's a product that makes our lives better and is important to sustain us. They understand that, and they understand that that's what drives things. And maybe they don't say it the way we say it, but on a political program. But they understand that that's what creates what we need. It's not, they can't. The idea that some government bureaucrats in an office in Washington can create that or creates that is sort of silly. Yeah. It's just silly. So why on earth would we trust government to provide for us when we know how to provide for ourselves? And to me, that's a very kind of a bedrock American principle, is that we provide for ourselves. The government is there are necessary things for government to do: defend our borders, defend our freedoms here and abroad, in terms of from the standpoint of the military. But the bottom line is they understand that fundamental fact, and as a consequence, when they shake their head and say, well, how can we spend more money than we have? That's just not. It's not. I mean, they also understand it's not right. It's not only is it unsustainable, an unsustainable and policy, because you can't continue to do that forever. But they also know it's not right. I mean, the parents have taught them that, and so the idea that we can't get that in Washington is very disturbing. But it's also, and I find this in this job, which is not always enjoyable. But one of the enjoyable things is, when you talk to these young people, it does give you hope that not all, that we really do have young people that are coming along that do understand.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Congressman Hurt, not only what the government does affects us, but as you pointed out so rightly in a column you released yesterday, it's what they don't do that causes budget uncertainty and regulatory uncertainty. Can you talk a little bit more about that, sir? That was a great column, by the way.
Well, thank you. One of the things that we find, and this past week we spent time across the district meeting with business leaders and local elected officials who, by the way, balance their budgets, of course, and in many ways have to. Sean understands this, and they have to grapple with the irresponsibility in Washington and what happens when we have an unsustainable policy. Then all of a sudden you have to make changes that have effects at state level and local level, and so. When you have these wide swings in policy in Washington, obviously that has a tremendous effect on not only those who count on funding, for instance, at government levels, but more important, folks in business who can't plan when they have a tax code that's completely dysfunctional and up in the air, as it was to a much greater extent prior to the fiscal cliff. Folks that can't plan because of the sequestration issues and the uncertainty surrounding that. Probably the most, I think, the most destructive uncertainty comes out of the regulatory process, by which businesses can't plan for policies that for instance, Dodd-Frank, which is thousands of pages of a bill, dozens and dozens and dozens of quote rulemakings have not been. The law's been passed for 3 years, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of rulemakings that are still up in the air. And these banks don't, banks and community banks, Main Street banks, small businesses that depend on those banks, they can't function efficiently when they don't have any idea what the rules are going to be. They know what the law is, but they don't know what the rules are going to be and how they will affect them. And that's the kind of thing I think that really does hamper job growth, because nobody who is facing that is going to say, "Hey, I'm even though I don't know what the rules are going to be, and I should hold back, perhaps even plan for another compliance officer in our bank. We're going to forge ahead and hire new employees." That's not how it works. They just sit on their cash if they have it.
Yeah, and you talk about regulations, and obviously the 5th District of Virginia is very rural, very agricultural in most places. You talk about there was an article the other day that was actually talking about small farmers and the sort of pain that they're under, not just from the increased cost of gasoline, but you're talking about the EPA regs, and even the Commonwealth of Virginia, DEQ, and some of the stormwater regs that we're dealing with there, and how that's really pressuring small farmers to sort of give up to sort of a big agro sort of thing. I know you're sitting there talking with Future Farmers of America. I mean, tell me what the state of agriculture is in Washington, and obviously the concerns of these small farmers better than anyone. How bad is it for the folks, Northern Virginia, Richmond, Hampton Roads, that really don't understand, how bad that really is, and what sort of pressures our small farmers are really under? I mean, talk to me a little bit about that.
A story that has always stuck with me, a story of an encounter I had a couple of years ago. It sticks with me, and it's a story of visiting with a man, a farmer in Nelson County, who has a nursery and an orchard, been growing fruit for generations, literally generations. Mm-hmm. There are 3 generations currently working on the farm. I mean, it's in many ways it is a defining American story. The idea that these folks have been here for generations and are still working, producing the finest Virginia products. Mm-hmm. And he walked through with me the different regulatory agencies that he has to report to on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly basis. The EPA, the Corps of Engineers, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Tax, the USDA, the FDA. He went through just an alphabet soup of the number of agencies that he has got to deal with, state and federal. It's a dozen or more of these agencies, all well-meaning, but each one is requiring him to submit time. It's adding cost to his product. Many times he's having to pay for licenses and so forth. And he said, Mr. Hurt, he said, all I'm trying to do is grow peach. That's all I'm trying to do. But I've got to answer to 12, 15 different government agencies about the process the process, and I think it's a great example of exactly what's happening to agriculture. And look, I come from a part of Virginia where manufacturing was huge, textiles huge. We had the finest fabrics, finest textiles, finest furniture, competed, that was sold all over the world. And we know what has happened to manufacturing in rural Virginia and rural North Carolina and Southside Virginia. Those jobs are gone. Mm-hmm. Those jobs are gone because the weight of labor policy, environmental policy, of tax policy, the weight of all those things on those businesses finally was too much. And we know where those jobs went. And what this farmer says is you can keep putting stuff on us if you want, but what you're going to end up doing is end up buying all your food and all your and everything that sustains us terrible, terrible thing to allow to happen. So I use that as an example of sort of a wake-up call for us to really to screw down on these issues. Things like this farm dust bill.
Yeah.
You know, one of the bills that I put in last year dealt with the Clean Water Act and the idea that the Corps of Engineers, that in order to build a farm pond in this country, in order to build a farm pond, you have to get permission from the federal government. And what this farmer shared with me was it took him 2 years, cost him $30,000, never moved the first inch of dirt, moved for $30,000 to build a farm pond so he could irrigate his corn, so he could feed his cattle, and so that he could produce milk to put on the table.
Outrageous.
It is outrageous.
Outrageous. Absolutely outrageous.
Founders would just not know what to say.
You can't think of anything.
They wouldn't be able to do it.
You can. It's analogous to what's going on in California still in the Central Valley there, where they won't turn the water on for irrigation. They'd rather divert it to freshwater uses in other districts and not let the people who actually had that water run through their area not use it for what has been called the fruit basket of the West there. So, Congressman Hurt, in the time we have, a lot of people know that you are on the House Financial Services Committee, and besides the idea of repealing it, can you give us an idea of how financially we can adjust what we have been saddled with the Affordable Health Care Act, Obamacare?
Well, looking at the experience of the Financial Services Committee, I think, is helpful because, of course, we got saddled with Dodd-Frank, which is going to reduce choice. It'll be reduced choice for consumers. It will run the cost of credit up for consumers, and it's going to make it more difficult for our economy. It's interesting because over the last couple of years, even though Barney Frank, who is one of the namesakes, you know, I heard him on more than one occasion in committee say this bill isn't perfect. Well, the problem is if it, the solution is if it's not perfect, then let's fix it. And so, but every bill that we put in, and I introduced a couple of bills to try to change Dodd-Frank, not repeal it, but just change it. And so what happened was it hit a buzzsaw over in the Senate. We can't allow that to happen with this health care law. The election, I think, one of the things that, one of the unhappy results of the election is I think that we are stuck with this President's health care law for the foreseeable future. But good grief, I mean, the fallout that is and will come out of this bill, the unintended consequences that are revealed on a regular basis, I just hope and pray that the folks in the Senate will be reasonable in terms of dealing with those consequences because they are real. They're going to hurt people. There's some things that we can't fix. I mean, the overall principle of it, we can't fix unless the president has a change of heart.
Yeah.
But there are things we ought to be able to do to try to minimize some of the effects, and I hope that they'll be reasonable as we go forward. That's the only thing we can hope for.
Exactly. Congressman, we can't thank you enough for the time. I know you have a 7:30 commitment. We will let you go, but again, your insight and your representation of your district is to be lauded. It's always a pleasure to speak to you, and we hope we can do that again soon.
Thank you, gentlemen. I always appreciate being on your program.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you so much. It is coming up now on 1:30 here on the John Frederick Show. Our window on the weather this hour is brought to you by the good folks at Air Conditioning Specialists, our good friends, the owners, Chrissy and Alan Smith. You can expect only the very best with Air Conditioning Specialists. Their promise to deliver to you the perfect HVAC system with outstanding quality products and superior knock your socks off customer service. And yes, Sean, I have not worn a pair of socks since I joined this program in November. So it's true. For all your air conditioning needs, go to acspecialist.net. Well, I did once with that suit I wore at the Republican Party of Virginia conference.
Sandals ever since, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Jesus wore sandals.
Like on the set of Ben-Hur all of a sudden.
So you're okay. I mean, it's, you got to follow the trendsetters, man.
I like it. 41 degrees, clear this morning with highs staying in the low 50s midday in Virginia Beach. 35 degrees, highs in the mid-50s for Richmond and Central Virginia. 37 degrees right now, partly sunny with highs only in the low 50s in Lynchburg and Roanoke. And 40 degrees with highs in the upper 40s here in the nation's capital. On the way, we will go out on the campaign trail with Anthony Reedy, the executive director, and Garen Shipley, the communications director of said Republican Party of Virginia. Common Sense Time is now 7:30 on the button. Commonwealth headlines with Ken Johnson. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, everybody. U.S. Senator Tim Kaine met with several military veterans and spouses yesterday at Old Dominion University to discuss the long-range effects of military budget cuts. While service members say they can deal with lengthy deployments, regular changes in duty stations, and even risk their lives in combat for their country, if Congress can't come up with a more consistent and predictable process for funding the military, more and more service members are going to start heading for the exits. The group sounded off on several issues, including Veterans Affairs backlogs and ineffective military-to-civilian transition programs. Some spouses complained about a lack of information about how federal budget cuts will affect sailors and Marines this year and beyond. Kaine, who also made stops at Langley Air Force Base in Hampton and Oceana Naval Air Station in Virginia Beach, said he plans to press Department of Defense officials for more details next week during a hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee. A Fairfax County judge has ruled in favor of 4 Sikh men who challenged a Virginia law that requires them to pay $500 to perform marriage ceremonies. The law exempts ordained ministers from various faiths from posting the bond to perform weddings, but the Sikh men said the law discriminates against them because their faith has no ordained ministers. Judge Dennis Smith sided with the Sikhs, saying the requirement to post a bond is unconstitutional, an infringement on freedom of religion, and ordered that the men be licensed to perform marriages without having to pay the fee. A key prosecution witness yesterday described the special relationship he and his business partner had with the Norfolk-based Bank of the Commonwealth in the years leading up to its collapse in 2011. 5 defendants, including the defunct bank's top executives, are accused of conspiring to defraud the bank out of $71 million. Eric Menden, who with his partner George Hranowski pleaded guilty to fraud charges last year, testified that the pair were known as friends of the bank, a status that allowed them to get loans at very low interest rates with no down payment, to regularly overdraw their checking accounts, and to be chronically late making loan payments. Menden, a real estate developer, said that in turn, he and his partner did favors for bank executives, treating them to gifts and free lunches. Menden is serving 11 years in federal prison and hopes that by testifying against bank executives, he will get his sentence reduced. Backers of Virginia's candidates for governor exchanged some hard-edged humor for April Fool's Day. Republican Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli's campaign issued a release under the headline, "McAuliffe to Open Job-Rich Plant in Virginia," which claimed that Terry McAuliffe had announced a major commitment to bringing manufacturing jobs to Virginia, and that Green Tech, his electric car company, would soon open a factory outside Fredericksburg. Then, under a headline of April Fools, the statement noted that McAuliffe chose to base his electric car company in Mississippi. The Democratic Party of Virginia responded in kind, issuing a prank release that falsely claimed Cuccinelli had resigned as Attorney General, with a statement that read, "Issues like his conflict of interest with drug company Star Scientific and his ideological attacks on the bipartisan transportation compromise are making it impossible for him to do his job impartially." However, a different April Fool's Day joke ended with an arrest in Hampton. Police were called to the Waffle House on Mercury Boulevard for a report of a robbery. Officers who responded determined that the report was an April Fool's Day joke, but they weren't in a laughing mood and arrested 20-year-old Susan Alexandria Tinker. She is charged with falsely summoning police, a Class 1 misdemeanor, which can result in up to a year in prison and or a $2,500 fine. Just really wasn't all that funny, was it? State and local news brought to you by the Chris Weaver Real Estate Team, your Virginia real estate leader, recognized by the Wall Street Journal as a top 100 team. Want to buy, sell, or lease? Call Chris Weaver. ChrisWeaver.com. KRISWeaver.com.
With common sense for the Commonwealth, it's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646.
The legislation includes the requirement that Arkansas provide voter IDs free of charge to people who don't have identification otherwise. The voter ID requirement won't take effect until there's funding for the IDs or January 1st, 2014, whichever is later.
What that disconnect between the rhetoric and action means, I'll leave to the analysts to judge. We simply evaluate it and take necessary precautionary measures.
We've made clear that there is a chance for diplomacy if they do the right thing, but not if they don't.
We think it's time for them to switch lanes. We seek peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and we think that's in the best interest of everyone in the region.
Right after the shootings in Newtown, the NRA's Wayne LaPierre called for armed guards in the nation's schools. Today, the gun lobby details the recommendations of what it's calling the National School Shield Program.
Many components significantly scaled back equipment purchases and supply purchases, curtailed staff travel, reduced the use of air cards. Within the executive office of the president, several offices have sent furlough notices to their staff, including to 480 employees of the Office of Management and Budget.
I just try to react to something that I can hit. Nolasco's a great pitcher. He carved us up all year last year, and he carved me last year. So, being able to get 2 knocks off of him was, good for me. And I think, we saw him pretty well today. And I don't know if you're going to do that every time against him.
Before we get started, let me say NBC and I have reached a peaceful, amicable agreement that is both beneficial to both sides. April Fool! That's silly, ridiculous. Never happened.
Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks. Common Sense News Time is 7:42 here on Tuesday, April the 2nd. Steve Ray in for John all week, who is on his spring break, of course, and with us today for a second day of guest hosting, the political editor of BearingDrift.com, Sean Kenny is with us. And Sean, it's been an excellent show so far today. Yesterday, you knocked it out of the park. You're doing a terrific job.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We're going to go to something that is in your wheelhouse. We are going to go out on the campaign trail, and courtesy of Anne-Marie Morgan of the Virginia Capital News Network, we're going to listen to a little bit of sound here from Anthony Reedy, who is the new executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia, along with Garen Shipley. And Anne-Marie got them to sit down and talk about what it takes to put together the mass meetings, the process of what happens when you become a delegate, and just the whole process altogether of getting out the crowds for these conventions and what happens down there. So we'll listen to this, then we'll chew on it for a little bit and get right into your mindset as to where the Republican Party of Virginia needs to go in order to grow. Now here's Anne-Marie with Anthony Reedy and Garen Shipley.
All right, tell us what the Republicans are doing, the mechanics of these mass meetings.
Sure. All the mass meetings are the lead up to our state convention, which is here in Richmond, May 17th and 18th. Each locality, their official Republican committee sets the time and date for their mass meeting. It's open to the general public. There's typically a filing date somewhere about a week or so ahead. Not every unit does that, but all the calls for the mass meetings are located on our website, rpvconvention.com. Someone can go on there, check out their individual county, say Greene County, for instance. They can click on the link for Greene County, pull up the call, which is just a simple notice of the meeting. It'll give all the information on when the meeting is, who the people are to contact, and if there's a filing form that's required for them to fill out to participate.
And what's the meeting like for the candidates, each meeting?
It varies from locality to locality. Some localities have a provision that if less people pre-file for the meeting than delegate spots available, they may actually cancel the meeting. If a unit decides to hold the meeting, they'll go in, they'll do their opening, which is like most typical meetings, prayer, pledge, things of that nature. They'll often let either candidates or representatives from the campaigns come and speak. That way, just give some information to the people attending the mass meeting. And then they'll take some kind of vote on officially electing all the delegates to represent their local county or city at the convention.
So tell us how the number of delegates are calculated, because I saw that each locality has a different amount.
Sure, yeah. It's all based on the vote for president and governor in previous elections, the amount of Republican vote in a given locality, and each unit is given one vote per 250 Republican votes in that unit, and that sets what's known as their weighted unit vote, and then they can take up to 5 times that as the number of individual delegates to the state convention. So say a unit has 20 weighted votes, then they can elect up to 100 people to represent those 20 weighted votes at the state convention.
That's a way of rewarding them.
It rewards localities based on the amount of Republican voters turning out in their areas. And the reason we do the weighted vote is it gives a little bit more concentration of vote to smaller units, kind of like the U.S. Senate in the Congress. So
interesting. So, Garen, I would think it'd be hard on candidates. This is through March and April. There's crisscrossing the state. Tell us about what they might be going through.
Candidates have a real tall order in front of them. There are 130 some odd local units, and each campaign needs to go out and work in each of those local units to get as many delegates lined up as possible. And one thing that a convention does is it brings the candidates almost to every single corner of the Commonwealth, because you can't just go to the big media markets and buy television ads. This is one-on-one retail politics, and the candidates who are going to do well at the convention are the ones who spend the most time out on the road, who make the most personal connections, and who can really reach out to those folks who are going to spend the time and energy to come up here for a couple days to participate in the process. So it takes the entire primary campaign, the candidate selection process for the general, and it brings it to a much more grassroots level.
So they're trying to right now identify supporters in every single locality and then trying to get them to come to the mass meeting too.
Oh yes, there's multiple steps involved here. First, you have to find the folks who will support you. That's, if you don't have supporters, you're not going to go very far in any campaign. The next thing they have to do is get those folks out to the mass meeting where they can be chosen as delegates to go to Richmond. Then, come convention time, you've actually got to get them to show up. You've got to remind them, hey guys, you need to get in the car, get on the interstate, and come into Richmond. Once they're there, you got to keep them from changing their mind, because there are several other candidates who are trying to make just as appealing a case, and they're trying to tell why they would be the best candidate for lieutenant governor or attorney general. And that's a really tall order. And this doesn't work like the national convention, where a delegate from Virginia is committed to vote for a certain person. Every one of these delegates that is elected at these local unit meetings, they're free agents. They are free to vote for whomever they so choose. And if you come into the convention and you think you've got 90% of the delegates locked up and they're going to vote for you, and you only get 20, well, that's going to be disappointing, but that kind of thing can happen. The campaign does not end until someone gets 50% plus one of the vote on the floor in the Coliseum in there.
Don't they usually commit to somebody, though?
Well, yes. I don't know how well air quotes go over to radio, but there's committing and then there's committing. There's not a piece of paper that these folks sign that says, I promise, cross my heart and hope to die, that I'm going to vote for candidate X. The best these campaigns can hope to do is to find delegates who support them passionately, and then be sure that those folks are motivated to go to the mass meeting and then come to the convention in Richmond.
So then at the convention, are you expecting multiple ballots?
Obviously, for the Attorney General's race, there's only 2 candidates, so that'll be 1 ballot. But for the Lieutenant Governor's race, we've got 7 great candidates, so we do expect multiple ballots. Since someone has to get 50% plus 1 in order to win the nomination, we do expect it to go multiple rounds.
So it should be fun.
If you are a political junkie and you enjoy the down-in-the-weeds, nuts and bolts of how it works, this is something that you definitely don't want to miss.
Okay, good. Anything else you can think of you want the public to know?
Sure. People can go to our website, rpvconvention.com, to find out all kinds of information, whether it's the notices for the local meetings, whether it's logistics of parking or hotels for the convention, or if it's to check out some of the events surrounding the convention, such as our Commonwealth dinner or our breakfast on Saturday morning. They can go to rpvconvention.com to find out all that information.
Okay, good. And the convention's in Richmond?
Yep, Richmond, May 17th and 18th.
At the Coliseum.
At the Coliseum. All the voting will be taking place on Saturday, March 18th.
All right, one of the interesting things is the interplay between the delegates that are being recruited at the lieutenant governor level and the attorney general level, because this is the same pool of delegates that these folks are competing for. So if a very motivated candidate for lieutenant governor brings 500 delegates from a hypothetical county, then the candidates for lieutenant governor and attorney, they're competing in the same pool. So these 500 delegates for candidate X for lieutenant governor, they may be 100% committed for candidate X. But then you have your two candidates for attorney general who also have to play in that pool because it is the same pool of delegates, the same pool of voters. So they have to find those folks who are committed to being a delegate, but also they have to sort of pick amongst the others and find their supporters in the larger blocks that these 7 other campaigns are bringing in. So there is competition between the candidates for lieutenant governor, but then there's interplay between those slates of delegates, and it's just a really fascinating process to watch.
There we go. That is Anthony Reedy, the new executive director, and Garen Shipley, the communications director, on the campaign trail with us, courtesy of the Virginia Capital News Service. And Sean, the first question I have is, if it wasn't broken, why did somebody attempt to fix it with a convention setup instead of a primary setup?
Because it was broken, because an open primary is a broken system, because it allows Democrats to choose Republican nominees. So,
and I would point up the factoid that maybe 3% crossover.
It's a lot more than 3%.
At most, 13 is what I've seen.
Oh, it's a lot more than that.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I'll give you a great example.
Give us the truth.
Rothfeld-Chichester, 2003, he actually ended up having polling within the Republican universe. They actually split the GOP vote. But you actually intentionally had independent and Democratic crossover coming into that race in order to support Chichester. Rothfeld lost that race 75-25. In my race, when I ran for House of Delegates back in 2005, we actually had it was a GOP open primary. That's how the method of nomination was selected by the incumbent. And at 12 o'clock, I was a delegate at that point in time. And then all of a sudden, the VEA, the little red apples started getting handed out. That's what upended me at the end of the day, because Democrats went ahead and crossed over, and that's something outside of your universe. Okay. You see it time and time and time again in the open primary system in Virginia, where our basic constitutional rights, mind you, rights of free association, are trampled upon by Democrats crossing over and participating in our nomination methods, and it's not fair and it's not right. Now, obviously, there's pros and cons to conventions and primaries. Conventions can be very sharp. Conventions can be very divisive. At the end of the day, for all that division and discussion, the public writ large really doesn't get to hear that conversation.
Okay.
On the flip side,
right,
with primaries can be very expensive. They can bleed a candidate white. It can be just as nasty and divisive as a convention. And the taxpayers of Virginia have to pick up the bill for that. And at the end of that process, you come out against a very well-financed, disciplined Democratic Party in Virginia, where they have a very good good closed, depending on your viewpoint, method of actually selecting one nominee and making sure that they don't bleed themselves in conventions. So conventions tend to give you more conservative candidates, and they tend to activate the conservative base. Primaries,
all right. So that's where we're headed with this. I want to find out from you, with your brilliant political mind, and I mean that seriously, how do we churn this base to get more delegates out, more representation, more involvement? Mm-hmm. What does the Republican Party of Virginia have to do to re-energize when we took a pretty good beating in November of 2012, and now, as we all know, the Commonwealth election cycle never ends? How do we keep them engaged? How do we draw more into the system?
Well, the key, it's twofold. One, you've actually got to stand for something. You don't go in there and buy air. Gee, imagine that. A political party that actually stands for something with candidates.
Huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine that. And you can't keep running as Democrat light. You can't keep going the Romney route where it's, we're going to do big government on the cheap. Nobody believes that anymore, because we know we see it. We see the results of that right now. We go ahead, we have big government, but nobody wants to pay for it, and so we're $1.5 trillion in the hole in Washington. We're billions of dollars underfunded for VRS in Virginia. We get these potholes in our budget, like the transportation tax hike that we have to go ahead and fill back in.
Right.
That's the problem writ large. So we need a compelling alternative to what the Democrats are offering, and we need to be able to stand on principle and offer that. The second bit is that we need to be able to package those ideas areas in a different way than what we've been doing it in the past. Prior to, it's always bothered me how RPV and RNC, for instance, they go for coalitions outreach. And so they have, Republicans in a big pool, and then they sort of start attaching things to the hip of that great big circle. So it's Catholic outreach, or it's Hispanic outreach, or it's African American outreach, or it's Korean.
I find that very odd for conservatives and Republicans to do that when one of our basic principles is that we don't separate, we don't conquer by division. And why the heck are we labeling people in that way?
It's offensive.
Yeah.
When you start...
It certainly is to me. I don't look at somebody and say, oh, that's a Lithuanian, Nigerian American. I don't look at people as hyphenates. I look at them as American.
I mean, you're telling me if it's Catholic outreach, quote unquote, you're telling me that I'm outside of the boundary. It's the same thing with Hispanic outreach. It's the same thing with African American outreach. I mean, Tito Munoz is a great example. He goes out in the community, Prince William County, as a matter of fact, goes out in the community and he'll tell people, I'm born in Colombia, made in the USA. He's a phenomenally successful businessman out there, and he talks about and he preaches conservative values in a way and in a style that actually hits home no matter who you are. Those are the kind of leaders we need to be looking for and finding in our Republican Party. Terrence Bolton is another great example out in Prince William County. You find Panita Alualia is up in Fairfax. He's another great example. I mean, I could go on and on and on about the great. Daniel Cortez is another good example.
Well, here's what I want to do before we run out of time in this particular segment, and we can carry it over in the 810 segment, by the way. But one of the things that I have quoted you about is the fact that in social media, in outreach, the Democrats take 2 steps forward, we trip a little bit, maybe take 1.
If we do it all. I mean, look at Barack Obama. I mean, they literally outspent us 20-1 in 2012 in terms of social media outreach. Even today, look at Cuccinelli's social media outreach. It doesn't exist. The only reason why T-Mac isn't stomping us right now because he hasn't turned on the engines yet. As soon as he starts the car and starts driving, he'll be hitting the road in a Ferrari. We'll still be going down the road in a tricycle. It shocks me, absolutely shocks me that Republicans don't get social media. But a lot of that has to do with the way our campaigns are focused.
Even though on Twitter, and I know this because the hashtag TCOT, Top Conservative on Twitter, actually means something to me when I go looking for people to follow.
Of course.
To find out what is going on around the country, what news do I need to listen to, and what really are the issues surrounding that news cycle for the day. And I find it absolutely appalling at times that for such great thinkers that we really are shorting ourselves when it comes to social media for broadcast outreach beyond talk shows like this and others. So
Republicans think communications with social media. Democrats think ground game with social media. That's the difference.
Wow. That is an eye-opener right there. That's probably the most important 10 minutes of radio you will listen to all week long. Coming up next, we have clips of Governor McDonnell as he addresses Medicare expansion and school takeover, 2 very key issues as we head towards the special session on Wednesday here in the Commonwealth. Common Sense News Time, coming up on 7:59. This is The John Frederick Show.